Reading through some of the initial reaction from commentators is that this could impact a return of Russian tourists to Turkey, which of course is going to be key for the Turkish economy, not to mention what the implications are for Russian-Turkish relations, which had only just started to warm up a little bit. What's your take on the latest events?
Hey, Karen. I think that when you were talking about what's happening, particularly in countries like Turkey, like Jordan, and even in Lebanon as well, we're talking about 6 years of war, millions of refugees that these countries have had to shoulder the burden for over these several years. Turkey's economy, of course, lacking that dramatic growth we witnessed for a couple of decades. Economies in countries like Jordan and Lebanon were already under pressure. They've been hurting over the last few years in particular because of a lack of cross-border trade with Iraq and Syria. So this is already something that they've been struggling with in recent years. And one of the questions, of course, going forward, particularly for Turkey, is where it finds itself with a President-elect Donald Trump's administration, because this is going to be something that he will have to tackle. I mean, there are several Mideast questions: what to do about Iran, how to enforce those sanctions, what to do about assuring Gulf Arab countries that, we are still the allies of these countries and that we do have their best interests at heart. But in terms of dealing with President Erdogan in particular, a growing authoritarian power for years, the U.S. security services were pushing the Turks to really tamp down on this jihadi highway and really come to the table with some serious solutions in terms of what they could do to help security situations. And you really see that this country seems to be, in terms of their particular security situation, in many ways falling apart, particularly with these attacks over the last several months in particular. So some serious problems for Turkey, but also for the new administration of President-elect Donald Trump, how he'll deal with that coming in, and of course whether or not we'll see some more constructive action when it comes to dealing with Vladimir Putin than we've seen in the last 8 years with President Obama.
We've got a flash coming through the wires this morning, Hadley, and it's that the US Embassy in the Turkish capital, Ankara, says missions will be closed in Ankara, Istanbul and Adana after a firearm was discharged in front of the embassy in Ankara overnight. What is this telling us about the retreat and the concern that's been flashing up by US officials?
This isn't anything new. I mean, over the last couple of years in particular, there have been attacks on U.S. military personnel in Turkey. The fact that Turkey is a NATO ally hasn't stopped this. In fact, many analysts would say that this is a direct result of the more conservative bent that the country's taken over the last couple of years in particular, especially with what's been happening in Syria. And you have to remember that those who support what President Erdogan has been trying to do in Syria would say that, particularly with the United States, that, we really dropped the ball when it comes to, protecting Syrian rebels, to doing what we said we were going to do in terms of arming them and trying to put in some sort of credible force to take on the Islamic State. And of course, the question there was always going to be whether they'd be taking on the Islamic State or taking on Bashar al-Assad. So a lot of people are very unhappy with the United States in Turkey. So that isn't anything new. But I think that in terms of what the U.S. is looking at right now, they've warned of further attacks in Europe. They've warned of further attacks in the Middle East. And certainly that heightened security right around the holidays is something that isn't new, unfortunately.